unusually for a composer, I've got a dev kit, so I can play builds of the game. That's not, you'd think that would be normal, but that's not standard practice. Part of that's just like a practical thing. It's quite hard to get hold of a dev kit if you're not a developer, but it helps that, I used to work at Sony and I know all the right people, and I'm trusted. And so I've got to sign various forms to get that, but I do have a dev kit, so that means that I can download builds of the game and check stuff out. And I do find that really important, particularly for those levels where we just, for whatever reason, it's not entirely clear what it needs. It's really important to be able to just like feel it, because generally speaking, I'm not working on levels when they're at a white boxing phase. It would be too early. Like, things can change. There's not much point. So generally, when I'm actually working on something, it's probably been art passed to a pretty good degree. So there's still room for change, but like the team have obviously at that point got a pretty good idea of what they're making and what it's trying to be, and that's the most important thing for me. I also had access to like concept art, so I could, even if the level was work in progress, I could see what like the kind of the benchmark end goal was for the art direction. And then the other key thing is that Nico, the game director, is just really great. He really knows what the game they're trying to make is, which you think would be normal, but that's like, it's something he's particularly good at. Like, it's more about he talks a lot about his process and stuff, but for me it's about focus. So like he knows what's important. He can tell you about that up front, and then he can give you great feedback as to whether what you've done is achieving what it needs to do. And of course, because of the team's focus on gameplay and the feel, it's really a lot of the feedbacks is like, is the music doing what it needs to do? Is this the right intensity? Is it the right tempo? Is it supporting the gameplay? So it's all like gameplay centric. Does this feel good? And always the emphasis is on fun. Is it fun? Yeah, and I'd say that's like definitely the two things that are the focus for our conversations are, is it doing what it needs to do? How long it takes actually depends. I think when it's very clear what it needs, and generally speaking, that's particularly when a level's quite tropey. So if it's like a fire level, it's like, all right, it's heavy metal. You don't even have to tell me. At that point, it's like, okay, so I know what I'm doing, and I then just need to draw on all those little, that little collection of tricks that I've got now for, okay, how do we make this fun? How do we make this robotic? How do we make this digital? All the sort of pillars of the visual aesthetic and the art direction. And, I've got all these little tricks I've got now for how to back that up musically. And so once the sort of the general direction of what the music needs to be, that kind of track can come together in, like, I'll have maybe like a week or two. Whereas something that's a lot more involved, particularly when we start getting into tying it more closely to the gameplay. So for something like the Papa Tree level or Bubbling Under, which both have some interactivity going on, something like that's probably getting on more for like 6 weeks, 8 weeks maybe, just because there's a lot of like, just because there's like, for something like Papa Tree, like that's not tropey, so there's no like, okay, I know what the genre needs to be. They did know that they wanted that to be a song, which initially was kind of terrifying, because partly because like obviously the GPU song in Astro Playroom had gone down so well, and yeah, they were like, cool, let's have another one of those. So there's like a little bit of a pressure situation going on there, but also I was like, what am I meant to write a song about exactly? It's a tree. And I didn't think that, xylem and phloem tubes, going back to my standard grade biology or whatever, was exactly the right thing to sing about. So initially I sort of knocked that back and was like, look, there's nothing to write about here. It's a great idea. I'd love there to be a song too, but I'm not doing it. So I gave them basically kind of like the backing singers that are in that track. It's what my initial pass was. It was basically the track that's in the finished game, but with backing singers. With the idea being that we would make, and so that idea is still there. Like, you only hear the backing singers when you're outside. When you're inside, we sort of fade those out. So it's meant to be like all the little plants that are around the level are singing along. So I was like, yeah, they'll be happy with that. But Nico was just like, no, I want a song. So it was kind of frustrating in a way, but at the same time, I was like, right, well, the only thing to sing about is the fact that, like, what does the tree have to sing about? You just jump on him. That's it. Then I was like, well, I suppose at the end there's these birds, and you have to get rid of them, as you do with all the sort of the mini bosses and bosses in the game. So I was like, well, I suppose we could write about that. It's a bit weird, but all right. But then they had this idea that you had to go in the tree's mouth, and so it was very clear that it was just going to be a bit weird. So on some level, that sort of justified the weirdness of the song. And yeah, that like the actual songwriting itself was a case of, you know, just like once you've got that idea and that concept, you're just bashing your head against the wall to come up with stuff that does that and good by, like, you know, my standards. That is this good? Is that funny? Is it entertaining? And so we did a pass on that, and then actually later in development we came back to that level because we only had sort of 2 verses and it was getting a bit repetitive, and it's quite a hard level, so you know, you hear it more and more when you're dying a lot. So we had to write some more stuff, and so that's the kind of thing which there's some iteration there, but again based on player experience. So we put something in there, we're all happy with it, but actually once they've lived with it for a few months, they could be like, actually let's do a bit more, or let's change it, let's tweak it. So yeah, again, always just coming back around to, is this a good player experience? Thing to address as well is that there are some other composers in the project too, and that, again, that's just like a practical thing. How much music can one person write? And then there's music that's reused from Astro Bot Rescue Mission, and some of the tracks, mainly the ones from the other composers, are also reused from some of the earlier sort of proto Astro Bot games, the Playroom games. So we got some good coverage there. And I guess the thinking as well is that, you know, there's a lot of good music there which a lot of people haven't heard, so we're quite comfortable reusing it. And yeah, so my initial reaction was, yeah, I wasn't worried. Like, it was a bigger game, but there was we already shipped 2 games together, so we have a good idea of how long it's going to take when it's like a straightforward track, like I was describing earlier. There was a lot more kind of experimental writing in this project than I had anticipated. We kind of knew up front that the Sony first party stuff was going to be experimental in nature, because it's not, even though the brief was clear insofar as it was like, well, we need to take that IP and make it work in Astro Bot. So like that bit is clear and obvious, but actually what that means, like, it's a complete unknown, and we didn't actually know whether it would be possible to get it to work in a way that we'd be happy with. So there was a lot of back and forward on that stuff. And then things like, the Papetree, Bubbling Under, it wasn't necessarily clear up front that those levels were going to need extra time and extra love to get them to where we want them to be. And so, there was extra time spent on that hadn't been anticipated. But again, if you want to have the best player experience, then sometimes you just have to sort of suck that up and do the work. So a little bit of anticipation at the beginning about it being a big deal, and it was. Like, I was on the project for 2 years, so it was just a big chunk of work. And so it's nice, obviously, you know, everyone tries to make the best game that they can, no one's setting out to make a bad game, but having it have such a good reception is just, you know, it's not just icing the cake, it's actually like a massive relief after pouring all your blood, sweat and tears into something for that period of time. You know, it's pretty tense. It's, you know, it's like writing music day after day for 2 years is full on. Yeah, that was the first one we did. So in a way, it had the longest process, because it was trying to work out, okay, what is the process of taking what is fundamentally, in that example, adult IP. Certainly, well, you could probably argue the toss over who that IP's for, but it's certainly not for kids. It's not family friendly. And then the design team had similar challenges of how do you take that kind of material and make it family friendly. And for me, what was interesting was that little moment where you actually first rescue Kratos in the boat after the octopus boss. And it's a very weird mashup, because it's like the sort of Astro Bot beach music mashed up with the God of War theme. It's a bit weird, but that was the first thing we did, just to see, okay, that's very Astro Bot-y. What happens if we sort of, if it leads with Astro Bot and has a bit of sort of the Kratos theme in it, what does that feel like? And it worked in that context, but that kind of approach of like this is fun fun God of War would quite clearly just wasn't going to work in the gameplay level, which is much less Astro Bot, much more Kratos. So that whole approach of, okay, transcribe the music and make it in like synthesizers with like, you know, ukuleles and vocoders for the robotic thing, that wasn't going to work. And so that was a good discovery, but a little bit nerve-wracking because it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do? What does it mean to be more Kratos-y but still have it work in Astro Bot? And the assumption that I had, which fortunately played out, was that so I got access to the stems. So that process I'm going through now of creating stems for all my stuff. Obviously, the God of War music is orchestral. So when they're recording the orchestra, they actually record it in sections. So like the string parts are on like one recording, the brass is on another, woodwinds on another, and then you've got like all the choirs on a separate bit. So I've got like, you know, dozens of tracks. That's all this amazing orchestral arrangement. So first of all, it was just fun to like dig into that, because like the only people that heard that are obviously the people who made the music or the people involved in the music production on the original game. Mostly the people making that game would not have heard that stuff. It's just not part of their job. They don't have access to it. So to just be trusted with that it was a bit of a little sort of fun, nerdy, music nerd pleasure to just dig in there and be like, all right, what is going on in the harp part? What is going on in the nickel harper part? And yeah, I just enjoyed that. That was just like fun, basically. And then the idea was, I assumed if I basically got creative with that stuff and started cutting it up, and sort of the analogy I've used is it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle where you start with the jigsaw and it's finished, and then you just like tear it all up and you start like pushing little bits against each other that aren't quite designed to do it. And if you try that enough and you experiment enough, eventually you get like, actually that's not at all the original, but you can hear and see bits of the original in it, and it's in its new configuration. So that's kind of the approach I took, was cutting it up and getting creative with it. And that's just something that just takes time. You just have to be like, right, if I cut up these strings and I loop it and I repeat it, okay, that sounds cool. What else can I take from like the horn section or whatever, and just like start to play with it and reassemble it. And eventually you get this thing, and you just do that a lot until you get different ideas. And some of them are things you can use, some are not, and you end up with a selection of stuff, a montage you can put together. And then from there, that started to show promise. And it's like, okay, that I can hear God of War because it's repeating. That's like, for me, is a recurring theme in the Astro Bot music, where it's like, it's intrinsically repetitive because it's like wallpaper music that loops. But like within the actual music composition, the idea of repeating stuff is like a robotic, for me, that's a robotic trait. It's like mechanical, it's repetitive. And so playing with that, and also there's a lot of like 90s sampling aesthetic in a lot of the music, and that ties into that idea again, which is intrinsically, it's more of like an electronic music thing, but that repetition idea. Just starting to play with that, and then developing my own musical ideas. So like it's important for me that it's got the Kratos theme and you recognize it, but then I've written my own little melody that's on the nickel harper at the beginning. I just so happen to have a nickel harper because I bought one for another project sort of 10 years ago that I did called Tethered, that features nickel harper on the soundtrack. So I was like, that's like one of the Nordic, it's a Swedish folk instrument. So I was like, well, I've got one, I'm going to use it. And just get some of my own musical stuff in there. And that was one of the ways to sort of soften the seriousness of the God of War, is for me to have my like happy clappy family friendly melodies in there to juxtapose against the slightly more serious Bear McCreary's amazing stuff. And the last thing to just mention on that is that what was interesting about the God of War stuff was that like the theme there is 3 notes. It's like da, da, and then it develops, but fundamentally it's just those 3 notes. And that is super flexible. There's a lot you can do with that. And so in many ways, the God of War track was actually the easiest to take to a new place because it's so flexible. It was a lot more challenging to get that to work with the Horizon and Uncharted themes, because those are big old sprawling themes that have like multiple sections and so that's why those ones are a little bit more faithful to those melodies, is because if you cut those up, it just stops being Uncharted, it stops being Horizon. So they're less cut up, if you like, but they're still, particularly I think in the Uncharted track, like there's sort of new bits that are just basically me like playing about with the string part and the horn part and like turning it into a new melody, basically. But yeah, it was just those were the highlight of the project for me, because it was just the kind of thing I've not done before. Really, I've not really done much in the way of remixing other people's work. And again, it's like a creative challenge because it wasn't clear what if it would work. And yeah, it's great that again that sort of landed, and the so many of the fans of those franchises are pleased with it and are like, yeah, it's cool, because you know it's sort of it's an excuse, because you just wouldn't do that to that music. It would be sort of sacrilegious, but to make it fit in Astro Bot, that's what's necessary. And so yeah, it was just a really amazing opportunity to have fun with those iconic bits of music. I mean, I saw Julie Elvin on Twitter seemed pretty thrilled to the fact that I'd used her vocals in the Alloy remix, and Joris the Man seems pleased with it too, and so far he's not said anything mean-spirited about what have you done, Kenny. I've met Joris a few times, so I look forward to the next time I see him having a wee chat about that. What do you really think, Joris? But no, I've not. Yeah, I'd love to know what Bear McCreary makes of the God of War stuff. Yeah, I don't know if Greg Edmondson has done much games work outside of the Uncharted stuff. I'm not sure what he's up to these days, so he's probably less contactable. Not going to likely bump into him at a games conference anytime soon. But yeah, you know, it is interesting. Like when I was working out, you are conscious of the fact that this is someone else's baby that you are sort of cutting up effectively. But you know, I think the two things to try and do there is like, yeah, do it with love and respect. And you know, and those are games that I've played that, and you know, that I've got a lot of respect for too. So hopefully that comes across in the music. It's not. I don't think I've like ruined it. I've tried to keep the essence of what was there whilst changing it to make it actually fit Astro Bot. Yeah.
I was wondering as I was playing it, I was like, are we going to get to the end of this and there's going to be an astrofied version of The Last of Us theme, like Gustavo's little guitar piece? I was like, I don't think that would work.
I've got a banjo. Give it a go. Yeah, no, that sounds like the ultimate challenge.
Yeah.
I think my faves are, I've got a soft spot for Casino, just because in some ways that's the close aspects of that track are the closest I've got to like a 1960s, 70s library track. Like things like, you know, they play reverb on the strings, and there's something about the trombone part that's just quite 70s. That's just, so it's like, it's apropos of nothing. It's just me, you know, I've got a real interest in retro aesthetics, which, you know, you can hear that in the music in this game in particular. But that's something that kind of originally got interested in for Little Big Planet, because there's similar things about nostalgia, and it's actually, in a way, it's those are production. That's nothing to do with like the notes. It's the way you present the music. And as a sound designer, that's like one of my skills. Like I'm not the best composer in the world when it comes. Like I can write a good tune. Like as a fiddle player, I think I've got an ear for a melody. But you know, in terms of my actual ability as a composer, it's like there's a lot of people who are better at it than me. But music production wise, one of the ways to make music more sonically interesting is to like present it in a way that most people would probably like run in the opposite direction. So like there's not a lot of composers in games who are like, yeah, library music, whereas I'm like, yeah, library music. So it's like a guilty pleasure and a fetish being forced on the audience. It's one of those things that no one, like me and Nico, he's never be like, yeah, can this be more, you know, retro, please? It's just something that I do because I enjoy that, and in that regard, I'm sure it's something that Nico's supportive of, because he believes that the love and the care that the team put into their work translates to the audience, and I think I agree with that. Like even if it's subliminal, just like when you can tell when someone cares about the work that they've made, and that's one of the things that I care about. So it finds its way into the music.